Good morning, Wabash. Today, speaking at Pioneer Chapel is Dr. P.T. Wilson with his talk entitled Defining Moments. Dr. Wilson is a United Methodist ordained clergy. He is a deacon and elder and the youngest person ordained in the Indiana Conference. He maintains a bachelor degree, 2 master's degrees, 2 doctorates, and 2 postdoctoral certifications. He is licensed as a mental health counselor, marriage and family therapist, and a social worker, all 3 in Indiana. He is a clinical fellow in 4 international psychotherapy and group processing organizations. In November of 2018, he was inducted into the International Marriage and Family Therapy Honor Society. He is currently serving in his 9th appointment in the United Methodist Church as the pastor of Danville United Methodist Church, beginning in July of 2017. Danville UMC is the 12th church he has served since returning to Indiana in 1981. Dr. Wilson loves music, writing, reading, swimming, dancing, and traveling. His favorite city in the world is Sydney, Australia, and Montreal, Quebec comes in as a close second. Dr. Wilson dreams of speaking in front of crowd of millions. The largest crowd he has ever addressed was 260,000 people in Seoul, South Korea in 1995. After parish ministry, he will pursue the ministry of spiritual healing. Please join me in welcoming Dr. P.T. Wilson.
Good morning, Wabash. It's good to be with you all. Last time I was here, I did a wedding for an alumni. He's a lawyer. All of his guys and him were in Star Trek outfits, and all the women were in Southern Belle outfits from Gone with the Wind. It was quite a scene. All of them standing here, can't get that out of your head. So it's good to be back. Long bios. I was told to do that by Keith Owen. Thank you very much. You left out the part about I used to be the chaplain at DePaul University, but since I've left, they've lost the Monon Bell every year. There is a reason. I want to say thanks to the Sphinx Club for welcoming me here. When you all started that chant out there, "Come to Chapel," I thought I was back in Cairo with the minarets and all the prayer calls to millions of people in that large city. Oh, it kind of gave me chills up my spine. And thanks to Parker Knoll and Frank Russell. And thank you to Keith. I've known Keith since before you were born, actually. And you are now a 21-year-old young man, and I want to uplift that I am inspired by your dedication to treat all people fairly and equally, and by your commitment to provide a foundation for other people in their growth. You inspire me. So I want to share some stories with you. Some of them are kind of comical, some of them are not comical. Some of them are defining. One of the stories takes place supposedly at Duke University back in the 1960s, where there was an undergraduate getting ready to graduate. He only needed 2 more hours of a particular course in a field of science. So the only 2-hour course that he could cram into his busy schedule was a course on bird anatomy. He thought, well, what harm can it do? So he takes this course, and it's a horrible course, and a professor who lectures for hours without looking at anybody. And of course, you have none of those kind of professors here at Wabash, but Duke University at the time. And then finally the day came when the professor gave the final. He handed out a 1-sheet with 8 panes on it that had pictures of birds' legs. And the test was, tell me what bird is in which picture frame. He stews, he stews, he stews. He finally gets up. He takes his exam up to the professor and puts it on the professor's desk and says, "This is the worst class I've ever had at Duke University. You're a horrible professor, and this is a terrible exam." And the professor, looking up, said, "I see you have not even written your name on the exam. Who are you, sir?" And the professor sticks his leg out and says, "You tell me." Okay, that didn't go over the way I thought it would. How are we defined? You've already lived with being defined by other people. You are the son or daughter of so-and-so. You come from such and such city. You come from a particular type of economic background that people label you and define you over. They define you by the color of your skin, by your sexual orientation. They define you by who you support politically, what you believe in by way of an organized religion or not believe in by way of an organized religion. Those are all definitions that, in some regards, you control, but you can't change. Because you're going to be who you are. You're going to be from your context, your history. You want to have pride in your history and who you are. But those are defining labels. And you'll have defining labels all of your life. And we have to figure out what to do with all of that. We have defining times in our life, oftentimes by our decision. I believe most, if not all of you, decided to graduate from a high school somewhere. That was a definition. You decided to graduate. I come from Evansville, Indiana, Bosse High School. I graduated in 1974 from high school. We were at the very tail end of the Vietnam draft. In fact, my year was the last year that had to register for the draft. The draft was that the military command in the Pentagon literally rolled a spinning wheel and started pulling out birth dates. And if your birth date was chosen in order, those would be the people who would be drafted to go to Vietnam. So I had a class of about 680 students the week before graduation, and I graduated in a class of 480 because you couldn't be sent to Vietnam if you didn't graduate from high school. You have decisions that do define who you are and how you are. If you ever have the joy of deciding that you want to spend the rest of your life with a partner, and you go through a marriage ceremony, you put on a ring, that defines you by your choice. If you're ever a father or a mother, that will define and change who you are for the rest of your life. If you graduate from Wabash, that's a choice, but that defines who you are. If you ever have the joy of retiring, yeah, some people are looking forward to that already. That defines who you are. You have a lot of choices about that. Sometimes you don't really think about your being in charge of that part of your life, but you are. But then there come those defining moments that happen without your anticipation that may change your life and the life of millions in a moment. Now, I'm 62 years old. There are lots of memories I could share about my life, but I only have 3 memories that I share with millions of other people. I remember exactly where I was when we heard the news in second grade about President Kennedy being assassinated. That was a defining moment for the nation. I remember exactly where I was when the spaceship Challenger, the shuttle, exploded. I remember exactly where I was on 9/11 when the first plane went into the tower, but especially the second plane. When Al Roker, that wonderful, jovial weatherman on the Today Show, was not allowed to be on television anymore during the entire day, when he declared within seconds, "That's a second plane. This is an attack." They cut him off for the rest of the day. Our nation usually has a defining moment, unexpected moment, that changes millions. And those moments usually happen about 15 to 30 years apart. One of the joys of my work is I get to work actively with 5 different generations of adults in the United States right now. But I can tell you pretty clearly how old somebody is when I say the word Pearl Harbor. They just change. And it's not something I experienced. I wasn't even born at that point. But it changed them. We also have defining moments individually, and those change who we are. 2 of my defining moments, one occurring in 1977, and one occurring in 2011. In 1977, I had graduated from the University of Evansville. I had graduated in a very short time and had turned down a program on a PhD in philosophy. I didn't exactly have my head straight. I knew I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I had a friend of mine who talked me into going to seminary, and I agreed to go for 1 year as long as it wouldn't cost me a penny, and I got to go skiing. So I went out to Denver, Iliff School of Theology. I hated those religious students who thought they were better than anybody else. I hated some of the professors who thought they understood truth better than anybody else. And my last week there, I literally cussed out 2 professors in class. I did everything but signed a document that I wasn't going to accept money for my scholarship for the next quarter. And I went back to Evansville. And I was sitting 4 days later in a Denny's restaurant when we saw ambulance after ambulance after ambulance going down Highway 41. And then we had a gentleman who came into that Denny's in hysterics, and the waitresses were trying to calm him down, and he said, "I was supposed to be on that plane." And then when we got into our car to hear on the radio that the basketball team from University of Evansville had been killed in a plane crash a half a mile from where we were. I knew those guys. I knew the team assistants. I knew the new coach. So I walked into the chaplain's office, good friend of mine, Emerson Apps, and I said, "Okay, I'm here until you leave. Use me." And he's like, "Oh, no, you don't want to do it. Use me. I'm here until you leave." And so I was there for 4 days, telling families about their son's death, having a chapel of over 1,200 students in the dark with a big white cross lit up. That was the only light we had. Students in hysteria. An ABC television crew coming in from Chicago to film the students in infrared. And it was the first time I had ever used a particular four-letter word. And I said, get that describing the camera out of this chapel. And I pushed those cameramen. I could have been sued over that. Didn't care. And providing service to staff and faculty in their own grief. And then deciding I had to get away from Evansville because everybody was in grief. I wanted to get away from that, so I went back to seminary in Denver. And I will never forget driving through St. Louis when a radio announcer came on and said, "You want to hear something funny? It was 2 weeks ago last night that the University of Evansville basketball players were killed in that plane crash. The only player who was not on that plane because of a foot injury was killed last night in a freak car wreck, the only person harmed at exactly the same moment 2 weeks later." And I'll never understand that. But that was a defining moment. And indeed, my definition changed that day from being someone who serves, who wants to help other people, who says, yes, I'll do this, or no, I won't do that, or I'll do this for a while, or let's train somebody else to do this, or I'll serve doing this until I get to go to Florida on vacation, or I'll do this until I'm in control of the time that I do. I went from being one who serves to a servant. Okay, I'll go where you want me to go. I'll do what you want me to do. And there are friends of mine from Evansville that when they meet me and they say, well, what is it you do? And I tell them, and they start laughing, and they say, no, really, what is it you do? Because they can't believe I'm doing this work. So that plane crash was a defining moment for me. In 2011, I was experiencing what a lot of mental health counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists call theater tears. You're around so many people with so much pain, especially children. I worked with incest survivors for several years. That you no longer react emotionally to what's going on, except when you're in a theater. And I remember just bawling my eyes out because Harry Potter saved the day in one of those movies, and because Captain James T. Cook took command of the Enterprise. That had nothing to do with my life, but it was an escape for my tears. I even went through the deaths of my parents, 6 years in nursing homes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even did the funerals for my parents. Never cried, never released a tear. Had been living life for decades with a couple of illnesses and doctors saying, well, you'll never get cancer. And then on 2011, being told that I had cancer. And I cried for 18 hours without stop. And that's been a defining moment. Here I am 13 surgeries later, still trying to pay off medical bills, worth every single penny. I didn't choose it, I didn't want it, I didn't expect it, but it's a big part of who I am. You see, defining moments are going to happen to every single one of us in here. They've already happened to several people. Defining moments are out of your control. They're out of your charge. You can't do anything to change it. But how it defines you is how you get through those experiences. And it reveals your character, it reveals your education, it reveals your fellowship with others, it reveals your foundation, and it tells the world not only what you are, but who you are. You may be familiar with a band named Linkin Park. They had one of their founders commit suicide last year. This is from their last album. Who cares if one more light goes out? In a sky of 1,000,000 stars, it flickers, flickers. Who cares when someone's time runs out? If a moment is all we are, we're quicker, quicker. Who cares if one more light goes out? Well, I do. They found a way of coming together through their loss and getting through the pain and never being the same, but moving forward. You know, to this day, I cannot tell you very much about my parents' funerals, but I can tell you every single person who drove 5 or 10 hours to be there to support me. Defining moments. And when your friends have them, you either walk away or you try to make light of it or change the subject, or you simply say, I have no idea what to say, but I'm here. I'm here. I'm not going to leave. I'm here. Another defining moment that people have is in regards of going to prison. For several years, I would go up to the Rockville Training Center. That's not so far from here. It's one of Indiana's women's prisons. And on Friday nights, I would lead a chapel service for those women. And it got to the point where the joke at the prison was the only way I could get a date on Friday night was to have them locked up. That one went over better. Okay, good. And then one of those women at the prison told me that she was working on her autobiography in 5 chapters. I said, what? What are you talking about? And she gave me a copy of this. It's from a woman named Portia Nelson, who was a jazz and blues artist, 1950s through the 80s. It's called Autobiography in 5 chapters. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm hopeless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it's there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. We all make mistakes. But when a woman comes out of Rockville Training Center, They ask her what chapter of her life she's in. And now when I'm working with somebody who's an alcoholic or addicted, I ask them what chapter they're in. Okay, I've gotten too serious. You've heard the story, again, supposedly from Duke University, about the two guys who decided to go out and party instead of study for the final. So they decide they've got to come up with some kind of an excuse to the professor. They're not going to show up at the final. They're too hungover. So they say to the professor, we were on this road and we had a flat tire and it took us hours to be able to get the flat tire repaired and we weren't able to come back in time for the final. Would you please excuse us and let us take the final in a few days? And the professor wrote back, that is fine. Let's schedule it for 3 days from now. Hey, they had all that additional time to study. So they show up for the final and the professor says, you know, I'm glad you're here. I'm going to have one of you in this room here. I'm going to have one of you in this room here. And I have had to add one question to the final. And, you know, that's fair because all the other students were there on time. And this one question is going to be 50% of the final grade. So the students go to their selective rooms and they look down. And the question is, which tire was flat? That one went over well. So you're defined by others. You're defined by the group of people that you're with. But then you have defining moments that change who you are. You're getting a super education at Wabash College. You're getting the tools you need for the foundation to be the leaders for the next 60 years. But you all are going to have defining moments. I don't need to tell you that. I don't need to tell this campus that. But how you get it, how you get through it, what you do because of a loss or of a change, that determines the man you are or the woman you are. And that defines you. Not that I lost 27 friends in an airplane crash, but that I became a servant. Not that I have cancer, but that I'm fighting to stay alive and do something with the rest of my life. Finally, you may know of an artist named Mike Posner. He just released a new album. Wonderful words in one of the songs. Beginnings always hide themselves in the end. Beginnings always hide themselves in the end. You go through a horrible breakup, you think your world's over. You go through the loss of a good friend, you think your world is over. You go through a presidential election that doesn't go the way you want, you think your world is over. You even go through an incident in Washington, D.C. that's videotaped and used by all sorts of people to get their agenda done. And you think your world is over. And it's not, unless if you lie down and play dead. Good people, You and I know a lot of people who have been playing dead for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Some of them are in your families. I challenge you not to do that in your life. Call upon your brothers and sisters when you need their presence. Be surprised when you haven't even told them that you need them and they show up. Get through the immediate moment of what you're facing and then take the time, whether it's weeks, months, or years, to process what has happened to you. Use the experts who write materials, who provide YouTube videos, who are even in person, who can help you walk through, not showing you what to do, but helping to guide you as you make your decisions. That's the mark of a Wabash graduate. It's been my pleasure to be here with you. It's been my pleasure to share a little bit of my journey with you. It's been my pleasure to get excited about what you all are going to be doing the next 60 years. Remember, it began here, not in this particular chapel service, but it began here at this school with the people who are by your side, with the people you've come to admire, with the people who you are seeing strengths and talents rise to the surface that probably nobody in their hometown would ever believe they had. It begins here with people who have made mistakes, sometimes in classes and tests and papers, sometimes in terms of choices about life. But it begins here with people who you get to walk with as they're choosing to find a new street. It's been my pleasure to be here with you. There are copies. I don't know if I have enough of them for everybody, but if you want a copy of that autobiography in 5 chapters, there's about 80 copies that will be by the door before you leave. Thank you for your attention.